The funeral for my husband, Thomas, was the quietest day of my life. The sky over Bonaventure Cemetery hung low and gray, and the Spanish moss dripping from the oaks looked like mourning veils that had been left to rot in the salt air. I stood at the side of his grave, my black gloves clutched tightly in my hands, trying to remember how to breathe. For 42 years, Thomas had been my partner, my refuge, my compass. I couldn't imagine life without him, and yet here I was, a widow at 67, watching the casket sink into the earth. I thought the moment couldn't wound me more deeply until my phone buzzed. At first, I thought I imagined it. Who would dare message me during the burial of my husband? But when I glanced down, the words on the glowing screen sent a sharp chill through my veins. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My hands trembled so hard, I almost dropped the phone. With my heart pounding, I typed back, "Who are you?" The reply came instantly, each word slicing through me. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." I gasped, and the world tilted beneath me. My eyes darted to the men standing only a few feet away, my sons, Caleb and Mason. They were dressed impeccably in black suits, their faces carefully schooled into grief. But the longer I watched them, the more I noticed. Their tears seemed forced, their shoulders too stiff, their hugs perfunctory. Caleb checked his watch twice during the pastor's prayer. Mason shifted his weight as if impatient for the service to end. A cold thought settled into me. Something was terribly wrong. I had loved Thomas with every fiber of my being since I was 24. Since the day I met him on River Street in Savannah. I was scrubbing the steps of a boarding house in my faded dress and broken shoes when he stopped in front of me with grease on his hands and a shy smile on his lips. "Good morning, Elena," he said, his voice soft. "Need me to check out your bicycle?" I didn't own one, but I invented an excuse just to keep him talking. That excuse became conversations under the oak trees in Forsyth Park, promises whispered by the river, and a wedding in a church too small to hold all our dreams. Now, all of that, the years of hard work, the laughter of our boys, the smell of Thomas's shop oil clinging to his shirts, was being lowered into the ground. Except, what if it wasn't? What if he was out there somewhere, alive, begging me not to trust the very children I had raised? I pressed my trembling lips together and slipped the phone into my purse before anyone noticed. My friend Nettie laid a steady hand on my shoulder, whispering, "Be strong, Elena. He'd want you strong." I nodded mutely, but inside, my soul was cracking open. Caleb walked over, his brow furrowed in what he surely thought looked like concern. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice too smooth, too polished. I looked at him, really looked, searching for answers in his familiar eyes. But where I had once seen the wide-eyed boy who fished with his father at the marsh, I now saw something guarded, something cold. "I'm fine," I lied, clutching my bag as if it held my sanity. As the pastor droned on about rest and eternal peace, I felt none of it. My grief was heavy, yes, but now, laced with it, was something darker. Suspicion, dread, and the echo of a text that refused to fade from my mind. Don't trust our sons. If you're listening to me now, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're hearing my story of betrayal and revenge. I need to know how far my voice travels, because once you hear what happened to me, you may realize it could happen to anyone. That night, after the funeral, the house felt unbearably hollow. The chair where Thomas used to read the Savannah Morning News sat empty, his coffee mug still resting on the side table. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. Every creak of the wooden floor echoed like a ghost. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the pale yellow walls we had painted together 30 years ago, when my phone buzzed again. The same number. My pulse hammered as I opened the message. Check the bank account. Watch the money. They lied about the accident. I nearly dropped the phone. Accident? That was what Caleb had told me, that Thomas's death was caused by an accident at the shop. A faulty machine, he said, that had sent my husband to the hospital. But even at the funeral, there had been no talk of fire, no scars of an explosion, no co-workers whispering about what had gone wrong. A knot twisted in my chest. Could it be true? I poured myself a cup of tea with trembling hands and walked into Thomas's workshop for the first time since they'd declared him gone. The faint scent of sawdust and motor oil clung to the air. Everything was eerily pristine, too pristine. Not a single scorch mark, not a splinter out of place, no sign of the accident that had supposedly taken my husband's life. I reached for the drawer of his old oak desk, the one where he kept every bill, every warranty, every handwritten note. There, tucked between receipts and yellowed envelopes, I found a piece of paper with Thomas's familiar script. Caleb keeps insisting I increase the insurance. He says it's for Elena's safety, but I feel cornered. Mason brought more papers today, said they're for modernizing the shop. I don't trust their intentions. My knees nearly gave way. My Thomas, my steady, cautious Thomas, had doubted them. He had written his fears down like breadcrumbs, as if he knew one day I'd need to follow them. I was still gripping that paper when the front door creaked open. Caleb's voice carried through the hall, smooth as honey but edged with something I couldn't name. "Mom? We came to check on you." We. His shadow fell across the floor, and behind him stepped Mason, carrying a box of pastries from the downtown bakery. Their smiles looked rehearsed, their pitying eyes like masks I no longer believed. "We thought you might be lonely tonight," Mason said, setting the box on the table. "Got your favorite pecan tarts." The phone buzzed in my pocket again, and my blood turned to ice as I read the warning. "Don't eat or drink anything they bring you." I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "That's thoughtful of you boys, but Nettie already brought me dinner." I pushed the pastries aside with a trembling hand. For a flicker of a second, I caught it the tightening of Caleb's jaw, the glance Mason shot him, quick as lightning. Then the masks returned. "Mom," Caleb said softly, taking a seat across from me. "You've been under a lot of stress. Some neighbors told us you've been acting strange, asking too many questions." Mason leaned forward, his voice almost coaxing. "We just want to take care of you. Maybe it's time to think about moving to a retirement community, somewhere safe, with doctors around. We could handle your finances, the insurance money, all those burdens." The words slithered into me like poison. Safe. Doctors. Insurance. They weren't offering me care, they were offering me a prison. I looked at my sons, the babies I had once rocked to sleep, the boys who used to beg Thomas for piggyback rides. I searched for them in the men sitting before me, but all I saw were strangers. "Thank you," I said quietly, forcing calm into my voice. "I'll think about it." I lied, because in that moment I knew the truth. If I didn't uncover exactly what had happened to my husband, I would be next. Sleep eluded me that night. Every tick of the old grandfather clock echoed like a warning. I sat at the dining table with Thomas's note in front of me, tracing his shaky handwriting with my fingers. My sons, our sons, had cornered him, pressured him, perhaps even threatened him, and I had been blind. At dawn, I dressed and walked the few blocks to the bank on Bull Street. Mrs. Langley, the manager, had known Thomas and me for decades. She had watched Caleb and Mason grow from boys into men. When she saw me, her eyes softened. "Elena, my deepest condolences," she said, squeezing my hand. "Thomas was a good man." "Thank you," I whispered, my throat thick. "I need to review our accounts. All of them." She led me into her office and slid the statements across the desk. My heart clenched as I scanned them. In the last 3 months, thousands had been withdrawn from our saving sums. Thomas never would have touched without telling me. "Who authorized these?" I asked. "Thomas came in personally," Mrs. Langley said. "But," she hesitated. "I recall one visit where Caleb was with him. He said he was helping his father with the paperwork, something about Thomas forgetting his glasses." My stomach dropped. Thomas never forgot his glasses. I asked to see the withdrawal slips. The signatures looked like his, but the pen strokes were hesitant, shaky, unlike the confident hand that had signed my birthday cards for 40 years. I folded the statements and tucked them into my purse, my heart hammering. The mysterious messages, the strange cleanliness of the shop, Thomas's note, all of it lined up too perfectly. My sons hadn't just been circling like vultures. They had already started tearing pieces away. When I left the bank, the humid savannah air clung to my skin, heavy and suffocating. I walked aimlessly down Broughton Street until my phone buzzed again. Go to the hospital, ask for the report. It wasn't an accident. Don't let them fool you. Fear coiled in my chest, but I obeyed. At Memorial Hospital, where Thomas had spent his final days, I requested the medical records. The nurse hesitated, flipping through the file. "These are unusual," she murmured, handing me a copy. I scanned the pages, my hands trembling. The word leapt out at me in black ink. Poisoning. Methanol. Traces high enough to cause blindness, brain damage, coma, death. My knees buckled. Poison, not accident. And someone my sons had buried that truth beneath lies of explosions and faulty machines. I pressed the papers to my chest, fighting back nausea. I could almost hear Thomas's voice in my ear, low and urgent. "Don't trust them, Elena. Don't let them win." As I walked out of the hospital, I noticed a man leaning against the far wall of the lobby, watching me, tall, gray-haired, with eyes too sharp to be casual. When our gazes met, he tipped his hat slightly, then slipped out the door. That night, as the cicadas sang outside my window, another message appeared on my phone. "My name is Daniel Price. I'm a private investigator. Thomas hired me 3 weeks before his death. Meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the Magnolia Cafe. Back table. Don't tell anyone. Your life depends on it." I sat in the silence of my kitchen, clutching the phone, my tea gone cold beside me. My hands trembled, but not from fear this time. From fury. My husband had suspected. He had prepared. And now, through this stranger, he was still protecting me. The next day stretched on like an eternity. I spent the morning pacing the porch, my hands wringing the hem of my dress, waiting for the clock to crawl toward 3. Every sound, every car door slamming, every bark of a dog set my nerves on edge. When the hour finally came, I left the house with my shawl pulled tight around me. The Magnolia Cafe sat on the corner of Whitaker Street, a cozy place where Thomas and I had once shared countless breakfasts. The irony of meeting there for something so dark was not lost on me. Inside, the cafe buzzed with chatter and the clink of cups. I spotted him instantly. The man from the hospital lobby. Gray hair, intelligent eyes, a brown leather folder resting beside his coffee. "Mrs. Marlowe?" he asked in a low, steady voice when I approached. I nodded and slid into the booth across from him. "My name is Daniel Price," he said. "I worked with your husband. I'm sorry for your loss." The words, "your husband," nearly broke me, but I steeled myself. "You said Thomas hired you. Why?" Daniel opened the folder, revealing pages of notes, photographs, and small voice recorders. He suspected his sons. He didn't know exactly what they were planning, but he feared they were plotting something that would endanger him and you. My throat tightened. And he was right. Daniel pressed a button on one of the recorders. The voice that spilled out was one I knew better than my own heartbeat, Thomas's, steady but laced with unease. "If something happens to me," he said, "it won't be an accident. Caleb keeps pushing for more insurance. Mason keeps showing me papers I don't understand. Elena trusts them too much. I can't shake the feeling they're waiting for me to let my guard down." My tears came hot and fast. Hearing him, hearing his suspicion, his love for me, even in his fear, was almost too much. "There's more," Daniel said gently, clicking another recorder. This time, the voices were not Thomas's. "We can't wait any longer," Caleb's voice muttered, cold and sharp. "He's starting to suspect." Then Mason. The methanol will do it. He'll think it's some supplement. By the time it hits, he won't know what's happening. Doctors will call it a stroke. Mom won't question it. She's too blinded by grief. I gasped, covering my mouth with my trembling hand. My son's voices, plotting the murder of the father who had raised them. Daniel leaned closer. Your husband was right to call me. He suspected their desperation. Caleb owes a loan shark close to $60,000. Mason has gambling debts all over Savannah. They saw the insurance money as their only salvation. He pushed a photograph toward me. Caleb leaving a hardware store with a small brown bottle. The timestamp was 5 days before Thomas collapsed. My body shook with fury. My sons had poisoned their father for money and were planning to do the same to me. What do we do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We go to the police, Daniel said firmly. I already have a contact, Sergeant Whitaker. Honest man, not in their pocket, but we must move quickly. They've started preparing paperwork to have you declared mentally unfit. If they succeed, they'll control everything. Your house, your finances, even your freedom. I clenched Thomas's note in my purse, my resolve hardening. My sons had underestimated me. They thought grief would break me, but they had forgotten something vital. I was Thomas's wife, and like him, I would fight until my last breath for the truth. That night, I barely slept. The ceiling fan spun lazily above my bed, stirring the humid Savannah air, but my body felt as though it were lying beneath a storm. I kept hearing my sons' voices on that recorder, cold, calculating, detached from the love I thought I had poured into them. At dawn, I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table staring at the cup. Thomas's favorite mug sat across from me, untouched since the day he was hospitalized. My chest tightened with a mix of grief and rage. By mid-morning, I forced myself to dress and walk to the precinct where Sergeant Whitaker worked. The building was squat, brick, and familiar. I'd passed it 100 times but never imagined I'd enter carrying the kind of truth that could destroy my family. Inside, Sergeant Whitaker greeted me with a steady handshake. He was a tall man with graying hair and the kind of eyes that carried both kindness and weariness. Mrs. Marlowe, Daniel called ahead. He said gently, "Let's sit down." We went into a small office with peeling paint and a desk stacked with files. Daniel joined us, laying the folder down with deliberate care. "Before you decide anything, you need to hear this," Daniel said. He played the recordings again. Thomas's fearful warning, then Caleb and Mason conspiring. The room grew heavy, every word slamming into me like hammer blows. When the recordings ended, Sergeant Whitaker's jaw tightened. "My God," he muttered. "Your boys, they planned this." I swallowed hard, clutching my purse. "Sergeant, they murdered their father, and now they're trying to lock me away. If I don't act now, I won't have another chance." He nodded, already scribbling notes. "We'll need to exhume Thomas's body. If the coroner confirms methanol poisoning, that's undeniable proof. Between that, the recordings and the financial records, we'll have enough to arrest them." My heart ached at the thought of disturbing Thomas's rest, but I whispered, "Do it, whatever it takes." Whitaker leaned forward. "Mrs. Marlowe, there's one more thing you should know. Charles and Mason filed a preliminary petition yesterday at the courthouse claiming you're unfit to manage your affairs. Tomorrow, there's a hearing scheduled. If they succeed, they'll have legal control over your estate." Daniel's eyes met mine, sharp and urgent. "That means we need to move tonight. If they're arrested before the hearing, their entire plan collapses." I pressed a trembling hand over my chest. "Then tonight it must be." As we finalized the plan, my phone buzzed on the desk. Another message from the unknown number. "Be careful. They're getting desperate. If they suspect you know, they'll strike sooner than you think." I stared at the glowing screen, my pulse racing. Thomas's ghost still guided me through his words, his warnings, his courage. And I vowed then, as surely as I had on our wedding day, that I would not fail him. The hours leading to dusk stretched like a noose, tightening around my throat. I busied myself around the house, wiping already spotless counters, rearranging flowers, folding linens that didn't need folding. Anything to keep my hands from shaking. At 7, Daniel knocked at my back door. He entered quietly, his presence steadying me like an anchor. "They'll strike soon," he said, lowering his voice. "Whitaker has a team ready. But we need you to play your part." "My part?" I whispered. "You'll answer their call. You'll let them believe you're still pliable, that you're willing to consider their plan. It'll keep them close and make the arrests easier." I nodded, though dread swelled inside me. Pretending ignorance felt like poisoning myself with every word. Minutes later, my phone rang. Caleb's voice, syrupy with false concern, filled the kitchen. "Mom, Mason and I want to come by tonight. We've been thinking we know we pushed you too hard. Let's talk calmly, just family." I forced a soft tone. "Of course, son. Come by after supper. I'll make coffee." Beside me, Daniel scribbled on a notepad. "Do not drink anything they bring." I gave the faintest nod. At 8:30, their car pulled into the drive. I peered through the curtain. Caleb in a navy suit, Mason in a gray jacket. Both wore the same expressions they had at the funeral: polished grief, counterfeit sincerity. "Mom," Mason said, stepping in with a box of pastries. "We thought you could use something sweet." I smiled faintly, though my stomach twisted. "That's thoughtful of you." We sat at the dining table where Thomas's chair still stood empty. Caleb poured coffee into 3 cups, sliding one toward me. I left it untouched, folding my hands over the saucer. "Mom," Caleb began, "we don't want to fight anymore. We just think a retirement community could give you peace of mind. Friends, activities, medical staff. And in the meantime," Mason added, "we'll handle the finances. You won't have to worry about bills or repairs." I looked at them, my own children, and saw only strangers in expensive clothes. My voice stayed calm. "You're right. Perhaps I should let you take care of things. I'm tired of worrying." Their eyes lit up with greed, barely masked. Caleb reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "You're making the right choice, Mom. Dad would want this." At that moment, headlights swept across the window. Doors slammed outside. Caleb stiffened. Mason's jaw tightened. The front door burst open. Sergeant Whitaker entered with 2 officers, badges flashing. "Caleb Marlowe. Mason Marlowe, you're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Marlowe and conspiracy to commit murder against Elena Marlowe." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then chaos. Mason shot to his feet, knocking over the coffee. Caleb's face drained of color. "This is insane," Caleb shouted, but the officers were already cuffing him. Mason tried to bolt for the back door, but another officer grabbed him by the arm and slammed him against the wall. I sat frozen, breathless, as my sons were read their rights. My sons, the boys I had nursed, kissed goodnight, prayed over, dragged out of my house like common criminals. Whitaker bent toward me. "It's over, Mrs. Marlowe. You're safe now." Safe. The word rang hollow. Nothing felt safe anymore. But as the sirens wailed into the night, I clutched Thomas's wedding band on my finger and whispered a silent vow. Justice had only just begun. The silence after they dragged Caleb and Mason away was deafening. My house, once the stage of their greedy whispers, now felt like a battlefield stripped of combatants. The overturned coffee cup bled a dark stain across the lace tablecloth. I stared at it, trembling, realizing how close that liquid had come to being my final sip. Daniel stayed behind, clearing the cups into the sink while I sat rigid in my chair. His voice was gentle but firm. "You did exactly what you needed to do, Elena. You bought us the time to catch them red-handed." I nodded, though my throat was dry. It didn't feel like courage. It felt like betrayal. My own children. My words faltered into silence. He leaned on the counter, folding his arms. "What they did wasn't love, Elena. They used the word family as a disguise for greed. You didn't betray them, they betrayed you long before tonight." The next morning, Sergeant Whitaker called me down to the precinct. My stomach churned as I entered the station, but he met me with a grave nod. "We exhumed Thomas early this morning. The coroner confirmed methanol poisoning. Lethal levels. There's no doubt now." I pressed a hand to my chest, tears filling my eyes. So it's true. He didn't just slip away. He was stolen from me. Whitaker's voice softened. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Marlowe, but this confirmation means the case is ironclad. They'll face trial for first-degree murder and conspiracy." As I left the station, the bright Savannah sun glared against my eyes. I walked home slowly, each step weighted with grief and grim relief. The truth was finally in the open. That night, I sat alone in Thomas's workshop. His tools still hung neatly on the wall, his smell of oil and wood lingering faintly in the air. On his workbench, I laid out the letter he had left me, his handwriting strong and steady, even as his fears grew. "You were right, my love," I whispered aloud. "You saw what I couldn't, and because of you, they didn't succeed in taking me too." The next day, I received an unexpected visit. Jasmine, Caleb's wife, appeared at my doorstep, eyes red and swollen. She looked nothing like the polished woman in her red dresses and high heels. She clutched a folded letter in trembling hands. "Elena," she sobbed, "please, you have to believe me. I didn't know how far they would go. I pressured Caleb about money, yes, but I never wanted murder. I swear it. I loved Thomas. I loved your family in my own way." I studied her carefully, torn between fury and pity. "You stood beside him while he grew colder toward us. You sneered at this house, at the life Thomas built. Tell me, Jasmine, what part of that was love?" She wept harder, pressing the letter into my hands. "Caleb wrote this last night in his cell. Please read it before you judge him completely." I hesitated, then unfolded the paper. Caleb's handwriting stared back at me, shaky and uneven. "Mother, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I let greed rot me from the inside. I thought money would fill the emptiness, but all I did was destroy the only people who ever truly loved me. If Thomas haunts me, I deserve it. I am ashamed to call myself your son. I am sorry." The words blurred through my tears, but I closed the letter gently, folding it with care. "Sorry doesn't bring Thomas back," I said softly, "but at least it shows he knows what he's done." Jasmine clutched my arm, desperate. "Please, don't let him rot in there alone." I met her gaze, my voice firm. The choices were his. Now the consequences are his, too. She left in tears, and I stood in the doorway for a long while, the letter heavy in my hand. I realized forgiveness was not mine to give, it belonged to Thomas, and he was gone. The weeks that followed blurred into a haze of courthouse corridors, whispered testimonies, and the relentless ticking of clocks. Savannah seemed to watch me with 1,000 eyes, neighbors, church friends, even strangers on the street. Some offered compassion, others suspicion. But all knew the story. The Marlowe sons had murdered their father. The trial began in late autumn. The courthouse smelled of paper, polish, and nerves. Reporters crowded the steps outside, their cameras flashing as though my pain were a spectacle. I walked past them with Daniel by my side, clutching my Bible like armor. Inside, Caleb and Mason sat at the defense table, shackled, their once proud shoulders slumped. For a fleeting moment, my heart clenched with memory, their boyhood laughter, sticky fingers tugging at my apron. But then the prosecutor began to speak, and those images were shattered by recordings, receipts, and witness accounts. The jury listened to Caleb's own voice, cold and merciless, describing how methanol would mimic a stroke. The words carved me open like a knife. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Mason's voice followed, gloating about how easily they could fool me, how grief would keep me compliant. I lowered my head, fighting the urge to collapse. When my turn came to testify, I rose on trembling legs. The oath tasted bitter on my tongue. I looked at my sons, not as a mother, but as the widow of the man they had murdered. I raised them with love. I told the jury, my voice breaking. I sacrificed everything to give them better lives. And still, they chose greed over blood, cruelty over kindness. My husband, Thomas, suspected what I could not bear to believe. He warned me, and now I stand here, widowed, betrayed, but determined to see justice done. Caleb dropped his gaze. Mason stared back at me defiantly, but there was a flicker of fear behind his eyes. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Evidence piled like bricks on a wall. They could not scale bank withdrawals, falsified insurance documents, even photographs of Caleb buying methanol. Daniel testified as well, recounting Thomas's decision to hire him, the recordings he had uncovered, the proof that greed had become murder. On the final day, the prosecutor's closing words seared into the air. This was not desperation. This was calculation. 2 men plotted to kill their father and their mother for nothing more than money. If that is not the definition of premeditated evil, then what is? The jury deliberated 6 long hours. I sat in the wooden pew outside the courtroom, clutching Thomas's ring on my finger, whispering prayers. When the foreman finally stood and spoke the word guilty, my body sagged with both relief and grief. The judge's sentence rang clear: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 30 years. A hush fell across the courtroom, then whispers swelled like a storm. Caleb wept openly, his face pale as ashes. Mason clenched his fists, his mouth set in a bitter line. As they were led away, Caleb turned once, his eyes seeking mine. I wanted to see my son, but all I saw was a stranger chained by his own choices. That night, I returned home alone. I walked into Thomas's workshop, touched his tools one by one, and whispered, "It's done. Justice has been served." The silence answered, heavy yet peaceful. For the first time since his death, I felt as though his spirit might finally rest. After the verdict, Savannah seemed to breathe again, but my life remained a patchwork of grief and hollow triumph. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles, murmuring words of comfort that never filled the silence of my home. Doris came often, sitting with me on the porch as the evening shadows stretched long. "You did the right thing, Elena," she said one night, her hand warm over mine. "But right doesn't always mean easy." Her words lingered as the days turned into months. Caleb wrote to me from prison, letters filled with shaky apologies and desperate pleas for forgiveness. Mason refused to write, though I heard through the grapevine that he was struggling in confinement, his arrogance crumbling into bitterness. One letter from Caleb struck deeper than the others. "Mother, I see Father in my dreams. He never speaks, just looks at me with those disappointed eyes. I know I deserve it. I am sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but please know I loved you once, before greed consumed me." I folded the letter carefully, placed it in a box with Thomas's belongings, and whispered to the empty room, "Love without loyalty isn't love at all." Meanwhile, Daniel refused to let me retreat into mourning. He visited weekly, often bringing flowers from the market or small bundles of herbs from his garden. One afternoon, as we walked through Thomas's old workshop, now converted into a space where I kept potted plants, he stopped and turned to me. "You could build something here, Elena. Not just a garden, a legacy." "A legacy?" I asked, brushing soil from my fingertips. "Yes, for families like yours. People who've been betrayed by those closest to them. Justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It lives in the healing that follows." The idea settled into my heart like a seed. Over the next months, with Daniel's guidance, I began the Marlowe Foundation for Families of Betrayal. It was small at first, a local group offering legal aid and emotional support. But word spread, and soon people from neighboring towns came seeking help. Women who had lost husbands to fraudulent schemes, children cut off from their rightful inheritance, elderly parents manipulated by greedy kin. Each story was a mirror of my own, and each one reminded me that I had turned my sorrow into something larger than myself. By the second anniversary of Thomas's death, the foundation had grown into a recognized nonprofit, supported by donations and volunteer lawyers. At the ceremony we held in his name, I stood before a crowd of nearly 100 people. The garden behind my house bloomed with sunflowers, roses, and carnations. My husband was taken by the hands of those we trusted most, I said, my voice carrying in the warm summer air. But his death taught me that truth, no matter how painful, is always worth pursuing. If you've been betrayed, know this: you are not alone, and justice is not beyond reach. As the crowd applauded, I looked upward at the glowing sky, and for the first time in years, I felt Thomas smiling down on me. By the third year after Thomas's death, the Marlowe Foundation had become my anchor. The office we opened downtown, once a vacant storefront near the river, was filled daily with voices of pain, hope, and resilience. I spent my mornings listening to strangers whose stories echoed mine, offering counsel from wounds that had slowly begun to scar. One afternoon, a woman named Lorraine came trembling through the door. Her son, she said, had manipulated her into signing over her land in the countryside. He'd promised it was temporary, but then sold it to developers without her knowledge. She sat across from me, her face lined with years of hard work under the Georgia Sunday. "I don't want revenge," she whispered. "I just want my dignity back." I reached for her hand and told her, "Justice is not revenge, Lorraine. Justice is dignity restored. We'll help you." And we did. 6 months later, with the foundation's help, she reclaimed her property through the courts. The day she brought me fresh peaches from her orchard as thanks, I wept with a joy I hadn't thought possible since Thomas's passing. But even as the foundation blossomed, the shadow of Caleb and Mason lingered. Caleb continued writing letters, sometimes rambling, sometimes lucid. In one, he confessed to nightmares of Thomas standing in the workshop, watching silently as the machines hummed. Mason, I later learned, had been transferred to a prison psychiatric unit after several violent outbursts. He refused therapy, insisting everyone had betrayed him. News of their conditions no longer brought anger, only a dull ache. I grieved not for the men they had become, but for the children they once were, the boys who used to chase fireflies in our backyard while Thomas laughed from the porch. On the 5th anniversary of Thomas's death, we held a memorial service at the garden I had built from his old workshop. Dozens of families from the foundation came, each bringing flowers that turned the space into a sea of color. Daniel stood beside me as I placed a wreath of white roses at the foot of Thomas's stone, which now bore the inscription, "Thomas Marlowe, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man." His love was stronger than death. That night, after the guests left and the house grew quiet, I sat on the porch with Daniel. Fireflies danced across the yard, just like the ones my sons had once chased. "You've turned pain into purpose, Elena," Daniel said softly. I looked at the garden, the glow of lanterns still flickering among the roses. It doesn't erase the past, but it gives meaning to the scars. For the first time in years, I felt something beyond survival. I felt peace not because the hurt had vanished, but because I had chosen to transform it into light. The years slipped by, and with them, the weight of grief transformed into something quieter, more bearable. I was 70 now, my hair silver like threads of moonlight, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in decades. The foundation thrived. We had expanded beyond Savannah, reaching communities across Georgia and even into South Carolina. Lawyers volunteered their time, psychologists offered counseling, and families who once stood in despair now stood with dignity. Each success carried Thomas's memory forward. Each victory another stone laid on the path he had unknowingly built for me. One autumn afternoon, I received a letter with the prison seal. It was from Caleb. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Mother, Mason is gone. He took his life last winter. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. The guilt consumed him. It consumes me, too. I wake up every night hearing Father's voice. telling me he raised me for better things. I know I failed him. I failed you. I don't ask for forgiveness, only that you pray for my soul when I'm gone." Tears blurred the ink. I closed the letter slowly, pressing it against my chest. For the first time I whispered, "I forgive you, Caleb, not for what you did, but because carrying hate any longer would poison me too." I didn't respond directly, but I prayed for him that night. I prayed he would find some sliver of peace in the shadows he had built for himself. Meanwhile, life offered me quiet blessings. Daniel had become more than an ally, he had become family. He visited often, bringing laughter into my kitchen, helping mend fences, planting new flowers in the garden. Some neighbors whispered of companionship, but I never felt the need to define it. We were two souls bound by truth and trust, and that was enough. On the 10th anniversary of Thomas's death, the foundation hosted its largest event yet. Over 300 people gathered in the garden that now stretched across what was once his workshop. Lanterns hung from the trees, casting a warm glow as the evening fell. Survivors of betrayal told their stories, voices strong with resilience. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before them with Thomas's ring hanging from a chain around my neck. "Family," I said, my voice steady, "is not defined by blood, but by loyalty and love. I lost my husband to greed, and I lost my sons to betrayal, but I also gained a new family in all of you. Justice is never easy, but it is always worth the fight. Let my story be proof that truth, though painful, is the seed of freedom." The crowd rose in applause, some in tears. As I stepped down from the podium, Daniel took my hand. That night, sitting in the garden beneath a sky full of stars, I felt Thomas's presence more than ever, not as a wound, but as a gentle light guiding me forward. I had kept my promise, I had found the truth, I had sought justice, and I had turned our pain into hope for countless others.